Hello and welcome to AP4D's webinar today, looking at a new era in economic statecraft. My name is Melissa Conley-Tyler. I'm the Executive Director of AP4D, and I'm joining you today from the beautiful lands of the high country of New South Wales. I pay my respects to elders past and present of the Ngunnawal people and welcome any Indigenous people who've joined us today. We are really excited to have such a big group of people wanting to talk about this topic. So we've had 150 people either register to listen live or to watch afterwards at their convenience. And we're delighted to have people from across the 3Ds, Defence, Diplomacy and Development, and the very important things that don't start with D. So never let our name fool you. We're interested in all the tools of Australian statecraft and how we can improve the quality of Australian statecraft. So for you who are joining us here live today, we've got Q&A enabled and we'd love you to get involved, share your thoughts as you're hearing our speakers. We are delighted that we have 5 of the wonderful experts who are involved in the paper. We have Bagong He joining us from Deakin University. We have Helen Mitchell from ANU. We have Lowy Aho, who is from the Divine Word University in PNG. We have Nisha McDonough from Edith Cowan University. And finally, we have John Berry from the KPMG Geoeconomics Hub. So you're in for a treat hearing from all of them. I'll also note that we are live captioning today's event. So if that's useful for you, please just follow the link in the chat and that'll open for you in a separate browser. So I see many people who are joining us today who know AP4D well, but as always, we're really delighted when we welcome new people who haven't seen what we're doing. So I'd like to just quickly remind people what AP4D is for and why it exists, and particularly to welcome you on behalf of the co-chairs, Mark Purcell and Michael Wesley, and all the members of our advisory group. So AP4D was set up because there was a simple but powerful insight that in a difficult and contested world, you need all the elements of statecraft working together. So we're a platform for collaboration. We bring together people from the 3Ds and all the very important things that don't start with D, and try to get integrated, thoughtful approaches in a positive fashion for how Australia can improve statecraft on key problems. So we come up with options papers which look at a particular issue that is relevant for Australian statecraft, and we work across the sectors to gather good ideas and then push them into the Australian policy space. And I should say, we are absolutely delighted that today we will have the Assistant Minister for Trade and Assistant Minister for Manufacturing, Senator Ayres, who will be joining us with his response at the end of the discussions. So the only reason we're able to do this work is because of the support that we've had from the very beginning from the Australian Civil Military Centre. And I think it was a great act of entrepreneurship from ACMC to see that we do need to break down these silos and we need to have more discussion across the tools of statecraft. So just to say a little bit about ACMC and why ACMC supports this, I'll turn over to Victoria Pennington, who has very kindly joined us from on the road and has dialed in just to say a few words to us today. Over to you, Victoria.
Thanks so much, Melissa. It's great to be here. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the lands that I'm speaking to you from today. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations persons joining us today. The Australian Civil Military Centre's role is to strengthen Australian and regional civil military police capacity and capability to respond more effectively to crises and contingencies. As part of our mandate, we foster and support research which brings together these diverse perspectives. ACMC was pleased to support AP4D's consideration of the new era of economic statecraft to further our understanding of the importance of this issue. AP4D's work in this area is so important because all elements of national power need to be used to support Australia's national interest. I look forward to hearing today from our diverse panelists who will bring their unique perspectives to this challenging question. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Well, drum roll, I am going to now formally launch our beautiful new paper on what does it look like for Australia to navigate a new era of economic statecraft in the Indo-Pacific. Now, I should start with why are we doing this and what do we mean by it? Okay, so from our perspective, we've seen in Australian debates these discussions around economic statecraft, economic security becoming much higher on the agenda. So we've seen this from the Prime Minister, from the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and I think very interestingly from the Treasurer. The idea being that old distinction between prosperity and security seems to be breaking down. And this means a need for greater coordination across the different arms of statecraft. So what we've done to try to get some useful ideas into this space is we worked on, we did our own research and diagnostics, of course. We've then had a long consultation process. We've had dialogues, we've had consultations in groups, individually, we've had regional voices, consultations, and then we've pulled that together into this forward-facing options paper. And I particularly like to thank our former senior analyst, Dan Evans, now back in the development sector, but making a really great contribution to debate during his time with us. So as you can see, we've had, I think, an excellent group of people who've been involved in these discussions from the beginning, thinking about what is economic statecraft, what does it mean in the region, and then specific consultations with Southeast Asia, with the Pacific, and drawing off our recent Indian Ocean paper consultations to get a sense of how economic statecraft is viewed by Australia's partners in the region. So when we're talking what do we mean by economic statecraft, it's about using certain types of instruments, economic policy instruments, to achieve particular foreign policy objectives. Okay, and people can talk about geoeconomics, geopolitics, economic security. People talk about economic coercion. It's that group of tools that can be used. Now, in the paper, we try and give you a simple little rundown between ones which you might see as carrots and ones you might see as sticks. You know, whether they're incentives in an economic sense to try to get people, countries to do things you want, or whether they're trying to impede flows, you know, to coerce or to you know, use your leverage to achieve a result. Now, of course, there's no clear distinction between the two, and sometimes carrots can be sticks and vice versa, but that might help give a sense of what we're talking about when we're talking about economic statecraft. How does Australia use these tools, and how does Australia respond to the use of these tools by others? So from the consultations, I think what came through very strongly is a sense that this really matters, that economic statecraft is now one of the key sets of tools that countries use. And it challenges some of those binaries we have in our heads between economics and security, or between domestic and international. In fact, some of the things you do in, say, your industry policy to support domestic industries is now outward-facing geostrategy. And we saw that, for example, recently when Australia entered this space with the Future Made in Australia plan. So in the paper, and I'm not going to spend any longer on it because I want to just give you a teaser and get you linking on and having a read of the paper for yourself. In the paper, we look at 5 different pathways around vision, around coordinating mechanisms, around the way we work with our regional partners, about the free and open trading system, and about working with business. And what I've done is I've asked some of the experts who were involved in the paper to give you just a quick outline of each of those areas. So to start us off, I am going to go to Bao He from Deakin University, and he can give us a bit of a sense of, where this vision thing, if we can put it that way, why is it important for Australia to have a vision in economic statecraft? And do we have some ideas of what that might look like? So over to you, Balga.
Thank you, Melissa. It's a great honor to have a chance to talk about my views. So the report suggests adopting a clear vision for Australia economic statecraft, detailing objectives, strategies, including a long list of commonly used carrots and sticks, identify potential problems and obstacles. So I will elaborate on this vision by analyzing three scenarios. The center of the great power rivalry, the revival of regionalism, and a possible greener world order. So all those three scenarios really speak about the vision of our world order in future. So the report thoroughly and explicitly discuss the first topic, the great power rivalry, but only briefly touch on the later two. I will bounding the report, the key finding, with my personal observation, comments, and questions. So under the scenario 1 of the great power rivalry, the report introduced the key idea, the new era of economic statecraft, and underscores the significance of Australia government future made in Australia plan. It argues that in this evolving global context, Australia must address its economic statecraft with urgency. So the report emphasizes this urgency. So historically, Australia's sanction has been implemented primarily for humanitarian, human rights, democracy mission. As for last year, Australia has imposed a sanction against 9,500 individuals from Myanmar, Russia, Iran, Ukraine, and many other countries. It's a very impressive long list. The pressing question now is how Australia's sanction can more effectively serve a national interest among the geopolitical competition. So in the past, largely focused on human rights, democracy mission. Now it's really serving the geopolitical competition. The report provides a definitive answer to this question, and I recommend everyone read it thoroughly for a deep understanding of this question. But another question arises when the great power impose sanctions. How can Australia strengthen its capacity to resist? And how can collaborate with a regional partner? The report outlines several strategies. Australia has a successful track record of enhancing its resistance capacity by the centralized power, coordinate all the government agencies, and mobilize all the social forces, including industry. Particularly here in this case is military and civilian connections. A critical remaining question is how Australia can establish a national task force to conduct a comprehensive review of Canberra's responses to Beijing's economic sanction in the last 2 or 3 years and derive valuable lessons for the future. I haven't seen that yet, but hopefully it will be something come out soon. On the scenario 2, which envisions the revival of regionalism, or we might use this as a return of the regionalism, despite the UK's Brexit regional still going on, still involving, developing. So Australia is encouraged to support regional initiative in Asia and the Pacific, primarily through the sweets and carrots, but occasionally through the sticks. The report emphasized the importance of sustained strong relationship with the regional allies and recommends that Australia persistently engage in positive economic statecraft, particularly in providing development assistance. It showcases the Southeast Asia Economic Strategy and the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme as a primary example of Australia government economic statecraft. On this topic, AP4D is set to release an additional significant report next Monday entitled "What Does It Look Like for Australia to Support Pacific Regionalism?" I'm eager to participate next week. So Australia as a middle power has consistently employing more carrots than sticks in its economic statecraft. This probably is a key feature of middle power's economic statecraft. You use more carrots, less the stick. It's different from the great power. Exemplary, its role as a responsible international citizen and leverage its soft power effectively. The central concern is whether and how Australia can use regionalism tool to temper, reduce great power rivalry instead of exacerbating it. Now, this is a challenge. Do we use regionalism to intensify regionalism or moderate it? Additionally, it is crucial to identify action that should be avoided. For instance, Australia has historically sanctioned Fiji military regime and expelled it from the Pacific Island Forum. But such action must be precise and effective. So in the future, to promote the Pacific regionally, this issue should be considered as a very important agenda. Under scenario 3 of a greener world order, the report advised Australia to champion the transition to a great energy future. There's a section on that issue. A vital issue arising concerning Australia's coal export industry. Hypothetically, if both China and India were to successfully transition to green energy sources such as solar, wind, and wave power, so traditional energy source like coal could be faced a significant challenge. This raises the question, can Australia continue to leverage its coal industry for economic statecraft? Australia must reassess the economic foundation of its economic statecraft, consider those potential shifts. So I'm stopped here. Sorry, hopefully I'm taking 5 minutes. Thank you.
Absolutely perfect, I may say. And so thank you for taking us through both the economic statecraft tools Australia's using, the ones it's responding to. And I think that point you made around coordination, that's what we want to talk about next. So one of the report's recommendations is around the benefits of greater national coordination. And Helen, I know you've been in the system for a very long time, and now you have a little bit of time outside the system to reflect. Can you give us a sense of what coordinating mechanisms might look like around economic statecraft tools?
Thank you, Melissa. Great to hear Balgang give us a vision to start with, and congratulations AP4D on the paper. I really know it's a big push and a team effort, so well done. I think it's fantastic, and I love the regional perspectives that come out in it. So well done, Melissa, Dan, Tom, and everyone else. I think on thinking about coordinating mechanisms and how to use Australian economic statecraft going forward, I think the first place to start is a recognition of what both Melissa and Balgang have mentioned, which is that economic statecraft is real, and Australia's economic statecraft is an important tool. I think when you think about the spectrum of statecraft tools that Australia could be using to push its advantages and deal with the global system that we face. We have things like military tools that can come at high cost, but in some cases can be quite potent tools. We also have some probably softer tools of statecraft, things like information and diplomatic statecraft tools. Personally, I see economic statecraft sitting somewhere in the middle, not quite as hard as military tools, but sometimes this use of resources can be a bit sharper and have some powerful effects compared to our diplomacy and negotiation. I think it's got an important role to play, but the key part about it is the coordination of those tools together, which I know is AP4D's sort of guiding concept, having the all tools of statecraft approach. So it's not substituting one for the other, it's working together. So how do you actually do that? The government, of course, is not explicitly set up just to do statecraft. Federal governments, in concert with their partners at state and territory and community levels, do lots of different things, most domestic focused. But when you're thinking about shaping the international environment and doing statecraft, there is a recognition growing, I think. It's certainly coming out at ministerial level and at secretary level as well, that we need to coordinate and join up these approaches so that you're actually heading in the same direction and there's a targeted vision. What do we know? Well, research, but also experience, for example, from innovative corporate, big multinational firms can teach us a few things about how to have a coordinated statecraft approach. The first starting point is clarity about what the problem is that you're trying to solve, of course. So that goes to Baogang's point about what is our vision for Australian economic statecraft. Personally, I think that can look different in different areas and problem sets that we're trying to grapple with in the international environment. But there's a key thing here. We do need to have a fairly broad consensus about what are those problems we're trying to solve or opportunities we're running after. That's where things like rigorous frameworks can come into place. Treasury, I see, have recently introduced a national interest framework to guide some of their work. These sort of rigorous frameworks are going to be important for economic statecraft. Part two is thinking about how to tackle, once we've got these problem sets defined, how to tackle and go about whether it's solving these problems or at least shaping the international environment in the way that we want it to our favour. Well, that's about harnessing lots of different people and diverse skill sets. We know that cross-disciplinary or interdisciplinary cross-functional teams are really the best problem solvers. That's when you bring in people, yes, sometimes just with perhaps different sort of features about themselves as people, but it's really about differences in the way you think. Somebody who comes from an economics background, for example, is going to think quite differently from somebody who comes from, say, a psychology background. Those are just two examples. But these cross-cutting groups of people to solve problems and drive opportunities are going to give us an edge. That's what you see in the corporate world. For example, in big tech giants, I mean, I know we're just coming off a sort of spectacularly big tech giant fail over the weekend, but in general, you'll see in these big, very successful and very innovative corporate structures that what they've learned is, first of all, to sort of collapse hierarchies and to allow problem solving across teams. In the context of economic statecraft, I don't think this needs to be a huge revolution in what government does. I think government has shown lots of examples. I'm thinking, for example, recently of the approaches to managing COVID issues, of defining whether you call them coordinating mechanism bodies or task forces or teams to do that kind of cross-cutting work in a very streamlined sort of way. And that's what we need to do here. That's how you produce this sort of rich smorgasbord of ideas and you really harness innovation and creativity. So on that, the third part of this is really about structure. And it's about allowing people in these teams to flourish. So if you want high innovation and you want resilient corporate structures, then you do need to look at slightly different ways of doing things, empowering people, and I think most importantly, putting together groups of people with diverse sets of skills, backgrounds, life experience. That's going to get you policies, ideas, and outcomes that are actually long-term and shape the sort of future that we want. Already, I think Australia's come far in this. We've seen this joined up resolve on economic statecraft evident by people like the Treasurer, as you mentioned at the beginning, Melissa, but also other ministers and other agencies as well. Recently, for example, you saw a joint panel on economic security and statecraft headed by the secretaries of climate change, industry, and even the intelligence community come together and talk about the need to do joined up economic security and statecraft. So you're seeing signals from the top, which I think is a really good signal down actually into the working level, the ministries below the secretaries and the minister level. Going ahead, I really think Australia has an opportunity to harness economic statecraft alongside our other tools of statecraft, as AP4D points out. This will help us to meet these big challenges. Some of it, of course, is about international challenges, things like strategic competition, but it's also the other economic challenges coming at us. It's about the big energy shift we've got coming towards us. It's also about issues like inequality and changes in society, things like demographic challenges. So there's a big role for economic statecraft going ahead, and it won't always neatly line up, for example, with our defence partner priorities or our diplomatic and information statecraft partners. So there is good reason to have coordination in the Australian government to think about the economic slice of that and how it fits alongside our other tools of economic statecraft. I'll finally just make a little plug for economic statecraft. It has been shown in the past to have some powerful effects, and it can be actually quite a bit less costly than other forms of statecraft. So if you think about policies like Australia's AUKUS Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, this is sort of more in the military and information statecraft realms, or you think about big boosts in Australian statecraft capability like the Red Spice on the information and cyber side. For Australian economic statecraft, what this AP4D paper points out is that it doesn't need to be anywhere near those sort of magnitude of resource commitments. In fact, a lot of the expertise and the data is right there. It just needs to be harnessed. So I think there's a bright future for Australian economic statecraft going forward.
No, that's a great point. And I know a number of the development Ds in the room would be saying, yes, look at the bang for the buck you get with the development spend, for example. So what I want to turn to now is looking at regional perspectives. So as I say, we did consultation sessions through in the Pacific, in Southeast Asia, and through our Indian Ocean paper. I think one of the key points in this is that Australia has to think not just about itself, but how does it work with regional partners on issues, whether those are economic coercion, economic development. How do we work with our partners in the region in a way that they want? And so I'm delighted that we have Lowy from ABT Associates, many decades in Papua New Guinea public service, and now at Divine Word University to share his thoughts.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be a part of these great discussions. Firstly, congratulations on the to the AP4D team for getting this project through. And the report is visionary, and it from a regional point of view, it complements the recently launched Development Cooperation Policy of 2023. So it looks at ways of balancing the development cooperation as it is now. So when we look at the economic statecraft through development cooperation angle, they must be the challenge is to make it more sustainable, so that it reflects Australia's interest, values, and enduring connections in the Pacific region. These investments, or rather carrots, must be guided by context and the development priorities of the partner countries also. That is very crucial. Economic statecraft through the lens of development cooperation. And I'm adding in locally led development also, because locally led development comes into play now. Because how Australia approaches its development cooperation initiatives will be determined, its success will be determined by locally led development in the recipient countries. So it also becomes a truly fine line to work on when there are the variables. And the two speakers, Helen and Dr. Baogang, have mentioned that these variables must be considered at both ends, because all are brought about by geopolitical interests. Okay? Australia's 2023 development cooperation policy places emphasis on aligning with the development priorities of the receiving country, where carrots are offered and most times given. So this is where locally led development should be emphasized more as the vehicle upon which the carrots can be delivered. So we note that the carrots are not one size fits all, but because they must be tailored to the development priorities of the recipient economy. And this is where, as Melissa Helen mentioned, coordination becomes very critical. Coordination from the donor's perspective and coordination especially from the receiving economy. And then there's a great emphasis also on the report was placed on the engagement of the private sector, and great emphasis was placed there. However, there also remains the continuous challenge of delivering the carrots right down to the subnational levels. When official contact points have been bypassed, the challenges comes up, because a development cooperation from a receiving economist point of view is how do I say it? The results are magnified and amplified at the grassroots levels in any development economy. So that is where the boxes are ticked off. Okay, so when subnational when in the process of delivering carrots, the official organizations are bypassed, then those carrots could easily turn into sticks. Yeah. So, however, it is also understood that the delivery of these carrots are also dependent on the strategies of the recipient countries. And as the report stated very clearly, and the private sector's willingness to play as well, it's also important. So therein lies the question of alignments. And my talk is not long, it's just in summary, I also think that the economic statecraft can also be swayed or determined by the type of strategic partnerships both countries have. And I'm not talking about bilateral relations, it's the strategic partnerships and the multilateral organizations which both countries are members of. For instance, Australia and Papua New Guinea remain integral members of the APEC Fora, and Australia was in the forefront of assisting Papua New Guinea between 2014 and 2017 in the lead up to our APEC hosting in 2018. They supported the PNG host through policy initiatives. They, organized for 52 of our public servants to be part of the Queensland University and Adelaide University for a couple of months on end, and that helped organize the policy configuration of the region. Most of those members are now high-level officials in the PNG system, and those are the initiatives which economic statecraft should be building upon to ensure that we have a strong relationship. And like I said, strategic partnerships are very, very important in this whole equation. I'll stop there. Thank you very much. I'm interested to listen more.
Well, and I'm hoping that we will come back with some questions. Now, I know no one's put a question yet. I'm surprised you are so shy. I am hoping someone will soon put a question in. But if I can maybe take that point that Lowy finished on around economic institutions like APEC, about global trading markets, I'd like to now turn to Nisha to give a sense around the benefits Australia gets from those economic institutions, from a global trading system in dealing with economic statecraft, particularly from others.
Okay, thank you very much, Melissa, for that introduction. So yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about the challenges of promoting a predictable and rule-based global trading system, something that's been a national interest for Australia and something that's been heavily invested in since 1947 as an original signatory of the GATT, which then led into the WTO in 1995. Look, a bit of context here, and to acknowledge the work of AP4D and the experts who contributed to this really important paper. One of the things that highlights about that challenge of a multilateral system is this movement from a world of separated domains, particularly after 91, from through the 90s to 2000s, high globalization. International business, trade and commerce are really separated and insulated to a very high degree from geopolitics and security. And in a large extent, it was the ability of countries to agree to this WTO system of rules and abide by those rules to a good extent that allowed that insulation. There's more factors which I'll touch on in a moment. But as the paper nicely draws out, we have this now integrated set of domains. International commerce is now a tool to be used and a risk to be mitigated for states to engage with national security considerations. Domestic policy suddenly becomes international foreign policy if you're looking at the Made in Australia Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, dual circulation policies in China, and so forth. Economic security is a terminology we're all becoming increasingly familiar with, and as is de-risking. Now, a lot of these are cutting against the grain of a rules-based order because there's limits to those rules in how they allow people to deal with national security. It also brings us into a world where you have multiple disciplinary perspectives required. You have multiple social and political and business domains that are being tied together in a pressure point kind of manner, and tensions to deal with commercial logics, security logics, domestic economic development logics. So by bringing all these experts together to address these, I think one thing that it really highlighted to me was that this cuts across ministerial portfolios. Helen touched on that. It cuts across academic disciplines, right? No one disciplinary approach has all the answers. And if they think to do, they really need to think again. It cuts across the traditional briefs that CEOs would have got on markets, and now they're doing political science as much, and they're acknowledging this, just global CEOs, as much as they're doing market watching. So I think epistemological humility is going to be really important in understanding and addressing these issues. Now, to touch a little bit on the World Trade Organization, this institution shouldn't be underestimated in terms of its continuing function, despite all we hear about dysfunction. 160 members, national countries have signed up, covers 98% of world trade, right? A lot of that trade continues unmolested by geopolitical issues. Most of the time, it's certain strategic sectors, and economic coercion goes beyond strategic sectors to other sectors that are political pressure points for governments being targeted, right? But nonetheless, you have 98% of world trade. Now, what is this organization, this WTO? Well, it's a rules-based order. So as a liberal democracy would know very well, the principle there is to constrain the powerful. The rules apply to everyone the same. This is a political principle. You safeguard the interests of smaller countries. This is really important for middle powers such as Australia. It's important for most countries, to be quite frank, because there's only a few very large heavyweight countries that can really influence the system unilaterally. So it's an equality measure. It creates certainty for business. That's good for everyone. It's good for producers. It's good for consumers. For countries that aren't liberal democracies, it's still a pragmatic choice. It allows them to grow their economy and integrate into the world economy. And so, and countries have made that choice. We know there's a wide variety of political systems, yet we're all operating under this liberal international economic order. At the same time, that institution's under severe threat, which cannot also be downplayed, right? So the WTO relies on the goodwill of its members, that we all believe that everyone else is playing by the rules. All games break down if you feel people are cheating, they're gaming the system, right? There was a long-standing belief before geopolitics came into the picture that certain countries had a high degree of state involvement, China, of course, being one, state-owned enterprises and so forth, that were creating an unlevel playing field, that it's very hard to compete with state-backed companies if you're in the private sector. Now we have geopolitical issues. So the two largest members, the US and China, are competing over hard power considerations, power balancing, and wherever the rules are going to crimp and constrain their ability to implement what they view as national existential security policies, we know what's going to give. The rules are going to give. And then that destabilizes the system for everyone else. So there's a real threat to the WTO. Australia's policy continues to be promoting and advancing the WTO system, but also in acknowledging the limits of that system and engaging in policies that will ultimately look like a contradiction to the WTO or even breach some WTO principles. So I'll just give an example here of where the policy overlap is between a rules-based order and a security order. Critical minerals is really a keystone commodity and industry and sector that is currently being de-risked. Right, the goals of de-risking critical minerals are driven by its heavy concentration in one country. China is roughly about 90% of most of the value-added processed critical minerals. The aim is to mitigate coercion. The aim is also to restore resilience of supply in case of war. Now, the concentration has been driven by a mix of commercial incentives. China produces good critical minerals that are very cheap, but also that sector has been backed by the state in China. To be able to diversify it, there's no way to do that purely on commercial grounds. There's probably no way to do it without being in breach of Article 3 of the WTO, which is national treatment. You must treat foreign exports and foreign investment the same as you would treat domestic products and domestic investment, right? So the United States is at the forefront of trying to deal with this de-risking with the Inflation Reduction Act, but Australia is set to benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act because it's part of the local content requirements that will drive out Chinese supply, link that supply to subsidies for EVs, will allow in Australian supply, right? So it's a discrimination. China is contesting this at the WTO, by the way, and it's a sector where governments feel that markets on their own and playing by the rules will not allow for a sustainable security risk mitigation outcome. So it can raise up examples of where countries such as Australia will be challenged for being hypocritical. The US is also being challenged these ways. This is important in the global south, part of the worldwide policy debates. And so therefore you can see the contradiction can also pose foreign economic diplomacy and foreign diplomacy tensions, right? So I think the government has to be very upfront about these challenges, upfront about tensions between a rules-based order on one hand, a power-based order on the other hand, and then linking it back to the paper's goal of saying you need to have cross-disciplinary input. You need to have cross-ministerial connection on these issues and discussion. Governments aren't able to reorganize global supply chains that are highly complex, sophisticated, and built by commercial actors. They need to do policies that allow the business community to, as far as possible, do the reorganization.
Thank you. And with that perfect segue, I am going to go over now. I should say, as you were saying there, Nisha, this does cut across ministerial portfolios. And I'd just like to acknowledge that we've been joined by the Assistant Minister for Trade and the Assistant Minister for Manufacturing, Senator the Honourable Tim Ayres. Thank you for joining us. And you were just saying on the business side, coincidentally, our last speaker is John Berry from KPMG Geoeconomics Hub. And he's just going to talk a little bit about why it's important to have business voices in policy discussions.
Thanks, Melissa. And yes, Nisha, that was just, I was sitting here, I was starting to really salivate because you were really building up to some points that I wanted to make. So thank you very much for that. Yes, I'm here to talk about the important role of the private sector in economic statecraft. Although economic statecraft is, as we say in the report, wielded by governments to pursue their foreign policy ends, the effects are, like it says on the tin, economic. And this means that businesses are impacted both positively and negatively by the carrots and sticks that we outline in the report, and probably some other things too. So companies are very motivated to understand government strategies around economic statecraft. And companies, as Nisha was getting to there, have a lot of knowledge that can help inform and refine those policies. And eventually, they're going to be the ones that sort of put into effect the world that the economic statecraft measures are trying to nudge us towards. So a few observations. Australian businesses can be harmed by sticks that are wielded against other countries. For example, if tariffs are applied to imports from specific countries, we've seen the US use that kind of measure in recent years, then companies in the domestic economy that rely on those imports, their interests can be harmed. And of course, the final consumer can be harmed too. By the same or similar token, businesses can be harmed by carrots, by positive measures that are applied to the domestic economy. If some industries, say some manufacturing industries, are supported, then that's going to have a crowding out effect on other industries that are going to have to compete for labour and for capital with another industry sector that might be getting more support than they do. So that's another issue. On the critical minerals issue, another point I'd like to make is that, you know, yes, in theory, the Australian critical minerals sector has an enormous benefit selling into the US market because of this local content treatment that Nisha was mentioning. But also, you know, the dictates of the market often run counter to that. We've seen in Western Australia just in recent days the huge nickel project that's been mothballed, despite this kind of advantages. You know, I guess the effect that we want a policy to have, or that in this case that the US wanted it to have, doesn't always deliver the exact results that we want because of market realities. So I guess overall what I'd like to say is something that comes through in the paper is that the broader benefits for the whole economy that come from a stable and peaceful region, globe if possible, but region if not, you know, they outweigh the piecemeal benefits that come from individual policy measures, whether they be sticks or carrots. So a key message that comes from many in the private sector would be to avoid zero-sum moves and instead invest in the statecraft measures that promote regional relationships, emphasize mutually beneficial outcomes, and help maintain functional international markets. And some of that's getting to what Helen was talking about and you know, around coordination. So I think that's all from me. I'll make my comments short and sweet, Melissa.
Oh, we much appreciate. Well, at the moment, we just have one question, which is from the inimitable Victor Purton, who is asking us about our optimism. You know, how, if we are all optimists about economic statecraft, how can we use this to, you know, to help our economic statecraft, soft power, and international influence? So what I might get us to do is, for each of the panelists, if you'd like to give your answer to that, for you as an optimist on economic statecraft, please put that in chat. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn over to the Assistant Minister for Trade and Assistant Minister for Manufacturing, Senator Ayres. Thank you. And I should say that I'm very conscious that the Assistant Minister has been travelling around the New England, and it's very, very kind of him to find the time to come and speak to us today. What we look for is, I suppose, a policymaker response. We've gathered views from 50-odd experts around the region, and we're sharing them with the Assistant Minister, and we're looking forward to seeing what his response might be. Thank you.
Well, thank you. As you just indicated, Melissa, I think I've had a short amount of time to reflect on this excellent paper and listen to some of the contributions, and I guess wanted to offer a short response, but it's a rough and ready response, Melissa, I have to say, without the benefit of too much preparation, if I can put it that gently. It is, however, I think a really rich and important initiative to put this paper together and get this group of experts and participants, civil society, policy institutions and others together. Because I think this discussion about what economic statecraft and what statecraft means more broadly for the business community and civil society is it's important. It should be contested. There are a set of uncertainties around some of these principles that I think deserve proper discussion and proper engagement as we refine our approach to some of these issues. I think the insight that we've moved into an era where statecraft matters is at one level unremarkable, because these are really not new propositions. We have as a country and in terms of the global trade community set aside or at least claim to have set aside some of these propositions as we've pursued an open market and trade liberalisation agenda that has brought significant benefits. But the truth is, countries have always engaged in some level of statecraft, and the insight that diplomacy and defence, economic policy, aid and development strategies, innovation and industry policies, our climate and energy approaches are devoid of a geoeconomic and geostrategic context. Well, we know that that's not true, but it is, I think, as a starting foundation, it is remarkable that it's now so openly acknowledged, and there's an opportunity, I think, for some good work there. And I'm keen to hear more about where civil society and some of the policy institutions are at in terms of their own work. Some of the previous speakers have acknowledged there is much of the government's economic strategy, whether it's Future Made in Australia, the Southeast Asia Economic Strategy, the National Interest Framework that we've attached to incoming investment and how we're assessing incoming investment. These are all part of the Albanese government's approach to making sure that our economic policy is directed towards a safe and prosperous future for Australia, and that we have the capabilities that we need for the region, but also an assessment of what is in the interest of our region. I wanted to make just a couple of points, or three brackets of points. Firstly, I think that the middle of the document, where it talks about carrots and sticks, it's a really useful analogy for understanding, I think, at a basic level, statecraft. But I think, it's an uncomfortable sort of way of characterising it. I think that in Australia's, certainly in my mind, in terms of the way that we approach these questions, of course, conceptually the stick seems to make more sense in a multilateral context and an Indo-Pacific and a global context. That is, sanctions that we apply to Myanmar, for example, or to other countries around the world are in the stick context. I strongly believe that in the Southeast Asia context or the Pacific context, how we conceive of Australia's interest is the same as those countries in those regions are saying to Australia. That is, it's in our interest to have in the Pacific strong, resilient, growing democracies with higher standards of living, stronger social institutions, more social equity, particularly not in income terms, but also in gender equality terms. In the Southeast Asian context, it's in Australia's interest for us to have a strong, resilient region where countries exercise their sovereignty in the context of well understood rules and international norms, and that in fact we have a mutual interdependence in terms of our economic and industrial development. So our conception of our own national interest is utterly aligned with the conception of national interest that's shared by those in our region. And I think it's important to underscore that point. We are not using our economic statecraft in any other context than that in the countries in our region. Secondly, just the second bracket is, I think, as I reflect upon this, in my portfolio areas in trade and manufacturing, so working in the trade portfolio with Senior Minister Don Farrell and the broader DFAT portfolio, but also in industry with Ed Husick and more broadly with Chris Bowen and others and Jim Chalmers and the Prime Minister on the Future Made in Australia agenda. It's the challenge for Australia, albeit my portfolios are junior assistant minister ones, is really captured by that trade and industry being brought together. We have to simultaneously, whereas the old argument in Australia was free trade versus a protectionism, and you're always cast into the sort of the bad gang, the protectionist gang, if you had something critical to observe about the way that some of our trading arrangements impacted on regional communities in particular, or in countries in our region. That what is required now is firstly that we build the industrial capability that Australia requires for the region, whether that's in climate and energy or in security terms. That is what the Future Made in Australia agenda is attached to. But also, and just as importantly, we maintain our status as an open market, free trading economy in what is the fastest growing region of the world in human history, where 97% of our global trading partners have commitments to net zero and are looking for low emissions goods and clean technology from Australia. And thirdly, as a corollary to that, our objective is to the old industry policy was competitive in nature. Of course, there is an air of competition about this, but it is also collaborative. We are working with our partners in the region and across the Pacific. Finally, the third bracket of things, Melissa, if I can just get through the 10. I've got a minute short. I reckon I'll see if I can get through them. It's just four practical observations that I would apply just as importantly to ministerial work as it is to the work of officials and everybody else who's out there. Firstly, it's really important to listen, even to Australia's critics in terms of development and economic and investment and trade strategy, to all of the aspects of our statecraft, particularly those critics in our partner economies and countries around the world. They are often well motivated, and we're often better in terms of the outcomes, but also in terms of the process of engaging deeply with our critics. Secondly, civil society is really important. Trade unions, women's groups, development programs, the development programs of our partner countries as well. Really important to listen to, engage with, work with, and elevate the work of civil society. That's in our interests of having a stronger and more resilient region in the long term, even when some of their objectives are faintly irritating or cut across our stated objectives. It's really important to build those long-term partnerships. Thirdly, the business and trade relationships that we have with some of these economies today are not the same as the business and trade and investment relationships we need to establish for the future. That's not to discount the importance of Australian business investment in some of these areas now, but as we shape the nature of our statecraft and the future of our economic relationships with these regions and consider what is in Australia's best interests, it is not necessarily a continued focus on the pre-existing business and investment relationships, as important as they are. Fourthly, on that list is just how important I think it is that we elevate the role of women as business leaders, as officials, and make sure that we're engaging. Particularly, gender equity is a critical issue, it fits squarely amongst the sets of our national interest questions, and I think that it's important to elevate that question. And finally, I did say I had 4, but I've actually got 5, Melissa. Obviously, seems like an obvious point. but we have had an imperfect decade in some of these areas. And I just stress that it's firmly in the government's mind. Announcements are important, but delivery and consistency, predictability, and track record are much more important. And so the progress of our statecraft will be measured in terms of our progress over decades and not months. And that requires a careful and patient and consistent application that's got a bit of principle sitting under it. So, Melissa, that was all I had. I hope that's helpful.
Very much so. Very much so. And we thank you so much for joining us on the road and sharing your thoughts. I think, I mean, I took so many things out of that. I heard words around balance, around collaboration. I loved hearing that our conception of national interest is aligned with that of our neighbours. And I think you've given us a lot of food for thought. I'd like to thank you for speaking. I'd like to thank all of our panellists who joined us today for their thoughts and for very kindly answering some of the questions in the chat as we've been going. We know that this is not the end of the discussion. What we hope is that fulfilling our aim as being a platform to bring ideas into the policy debate, we can be part of that long-term focus on the quality of Australian statecraft and achieving the safe and prosperous future for Australia and the region that we all hope for. So if I can say a big thank you again to everyone who's joined us. If you would like to join us next week, we are launching our next paper looking at what does it look like for Australia to support Pacific regionalism. We'd love to see you there. And please do subscribe to us and follow us on social media so you can see all of our activities and how to get involved. Thank you again to the Assistant Minister and to all our panellists and to the AP4D team who makes this possible.